Hi, everybody. Welcome to the show. Welcome to the show. Today is all about intermittent fasting. We have a special guest, Cynthia Thurlow, is coming on. It's all things intermittent fasting, weight loss, healthy aging and longevity, hormone balance. So I'll let you guys start coming on. Yay. Welcome to the show. Intermittent fasting is our topic, and I've got the best specialist to come on today. So let me see if I can see if she's coming on. I've been running through the house, as you can tell. Let me see if I can get her on here. Hello, everybody. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Darnell Cox. I'm a 55-year-old healthy aging specialist and gerontologist. And so this show covers all things. Yay. Hi, Cynthia.
Hey, how are you?
I'm really good. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Just kind of getting my weekend started. We've been celebrating. My son finally made some decisions about the engineering school he's going to go to. So we've been enjoying the last, 12 to 18 hours as he made his final decision, which is exciting.
And where is he going? Can we ask?
Yeah, no. So he hasn't allowed me to share anything. He got into some pretty phenomenal engineering programs, but he decided to go to Virginia Tech, which I live in Virginia, and it's where my husband went to school, went to engineering school, and a bunch of his buddies are also all accepted to the College of Engineering. So for him, it's meeting all of his needs. He can play lacrosse, he can study engineering, and a bunch of his, childhood friends are also going. So I think that made that decision a whole lot easier for him.
Isn't it nice when life just works out like that? That's amazing. Congratulations. Congratulations to you, your family, your son, everything. Yeah. Today, we're talking intermittent fasting, everybody. We're trying to cover as much information as we can. So intermittent fasting on weight loss, intermittent fasting on healthy aging and longevity, the effects on hormone balance. So let's just get right into it. How did you get started in becoming an expert, because you truly are one of the top leaders of wisdom in this field, and you're a nurse practitioner, but give me a little bit of your journey and then we're going to get right into the good stuff.
So I'm so glad that we were able to connect. I'm an admirer of your work, so I love when there's synergy within this community. But I really came to intermittent fasting like so many other women do. I was weight loss resistant. I was in perimenopause, and despite all of my medical training and all the information that I'm exposed to, I got stuck in early perimenopause. And so I initially came to it for a desire to lose weight. I didn't initially lose weight, but I felt so much better. And it just made a lot of sense to me. I was never one of those people that liked eating breakfast. I was never someone who liked getting up in the morning and eating before I went to the gym. And so it allowed me to feel much more aligned with how my body works. And then it really became something I started talking to patients about, and any friends or family that would entertain listening to me talking about the benefits. I was like, I know we've been conditioning you all to believe that snacks and mini meals are beneficial, but given the poor metabolic health, perhaps there's something to this. And I always like to kind of start the conversation letting people know that, fasting is incorporated into most of the major religions. It is not new or novel, but it goes completely contrary to most of the nutritional and dietary information we've been giving our patients for years. And what I find most interesting is that women in our stage of life start to find that things work a little differently. And I always like to find the reframe. I don't look at it as a negative thing. I think we really have to lean into taking care of ourselves. We've been so focused on our kids, appropriately so, and our loved ones. And middle age to me really speaks to the fact it is the time in our lives to really prioritize ourselves. We feel so guilty doing so. But I feel like, intermittent fasting is a way to really honor our body and our biorhythms. And in a lot of different ways, I like to remind people that, whether it's 12 hours of digestive rest, or if you do a prolonged fast, there's different ways to do it. But I think for a lot of individuals, they come to it with a desire to lose weight, because most of what we recommend to patients is not sustainable.
Well, also, I think what I have found as a healthy aging coach, I get a lot of people in with skincare, and then I help them live longer and better, right? Because we tend to focus on what we see in the mirror. So when we're looking at ourselves in the mirror and we realize, or we look at the scale, we've gained this weight, we're not thinking about like the longevity of it or the healthy aging of it. We're thinking of like, how do I look better so I can feel better? I feel like I've lost control of the outsides. And I've often told people, if you fix the insides, how are your systems working? How's your body working? The outsides will follow. The weight will come off. The skin will get better. You know, all of that kind of stuff that happens on the outside, it's so interconnected with everything else that we do. So I think I first want to say there's a lot of misinformation, I would say, out there. Because everybody these days can be a health coach, you know. You just say, all of a sudden you're just repeating information. But how would you define intermittent fasting? Let's just do the what first.
No, and I agree with you. I think that there is a lot of misinformation. So number one, it's a prescribed time period in which you choose not to eat, and then there's a prescribed time period in which you choose to eat. So as an example, a very common intermittent fasting schedule is a 16-8. So 16 hours fasted with an 8-hour feeding window. And I think for a lot of individuals, it's understanding what can we do in a fasted state and what can we not do. If we want to do, I'm an advocate of a clean fast. I feel like, especially if someone's weight loss resistant, you know, the differences between, you know, non-caloric drinks and, you know, drinking ketones and all these other things. I'm like, listen, let's focus on a clean fast. Let's get, you know, the basics down, and then we can play with variation. Yeah. So it's helping people understand, what do we consume in a fasted state? So things like bitter teas, there's polyphenols in coffee and tea that actually send chemical information to the body, can help with fat oxidation and fat loss. Water with electrolytes, unflavored electrolytes. Those are usually the things I advocate for. I'm all about hydration and electrolytes, but helping people understand, like, the fatty coffee is not doing you any benefits. If you are weight loss resistant, please don't go and drink a 400 calorie drink and think that ultimately that doesn't have a negative net impact. And I think the other piece of it that I would say is just helping people understand, like, listen, if you are going from having a standard American diet, being very sedentary, to going to 12 hours of digestive rest, that in and of itself can be a huge, you know, net positive. And for a lot of individuals, it may take a couple months, or it may take a month to get to the point where you can go 13, 14 hours without eating. And it's because we have to train our bodies. It's much like riding a bicycle. Let's train our bodies how to harness this strategy and do it effectively and do it sustainably. I think that's the other piece of it, is a lot of our kind of toxic diet culture, which I'm sure you probably have heard it and seen it all, really reinforces short-term efforts to have a long-term gain. And I remind people, lifestyle changes are designed to be exactly that: sustainable long-term changes. So that's why the extremes are never going to be sustainable. And that's why I think fasting or digestive rest for a lot of people is something they can do for a period of time, whether it's they're on vacation, they're, you know, entertaining. It's like, I can just move things around, or I can choose not to fast that day.
Yeah.
So I think that's a good starting point.
And it's interesting, because when I work one-on-one with clients and I try to get them on intermittent fasting, one of the first pushbacks is, can I have coffee? And I'm like, of course you can. What are you putting in it? I'm putting in a little bit of sugar. I'm putting in a little cream. That's not fasting. That's not fasting, right? So zero caloric intake. And the thing that kind of, I think, drives me a little bit nuts is when you see the marketing around, you know, ketosis or the keto coffees and these kind of things. You don't need to eat things to be in a state of ketosis. You need to not eat to let your body burn the fat naturally, right? We shouldn't be having to purchase something for our body to be in a state of ketosis. It's just abstaining. And I think a lot of what people don't understand is because we've been fed, pounded into our brain, breakfast is the most important meal. And although I do agree that break fast, that meal in which you break your fast, is the most important meal. That's the meal where I try to consume as many vegetables as I possibly can. I want to get all that fiber in there and all of that. But it's that, just the, you know, the marketing of this, you know, all of the big food, you know, the General Mills and the Kellogg's and all of that. There's a reason why we have 2 whole rows of like junk food in our supermarkets, and one whole thing devoted to breakfast foods because somebody's making money off us while we're getting fatter.
Yeah, well, and I think it's interesting. I'm in the midst of like writing a new course, and I'm a couple modules ahead of my group. And I'm writing this module talking about nutrition. And before I even talk to them about what macros to focus in on, why we as middle-aged women need to eat differently. And I'm sorry, we can't eat like when we were 20, nor do I want to. Let's be honest.
Yeah,
I don't want to eat like a college student. But I think it's helpful for people to understand that the processed food industry has designed foods to be as addictive as possible. So those cereals, those breakfast bars, those protein bars, which most of which are full of crap and garbage, they are designed to hijack our brain, hijack our taste buds. They minimize our realization of how much we've eaten. They encourage us to consume far more food. And we know most Americans, I think the statistic now is 70% of Americans consume most of their food in a hyper processed, ultra processed state. And we know that when you're consuming that much processed food, you are consuming on average at least 500 more calories a day just from the processed foods, because you don't have the same realization. Like if you and I sit down and have a meal together, we ate a steak and we have some broccoli with some butter, we're going to feel full, versus if we sat down and ate, I'm not going to call out any particular fast food company, but if we sat down and ate, a big hamburger and fries and had a big soda, we would probably overconsume what we would normally eat, and we wouldn't even realize it. So I think the realization and helping people understand that nutrient dense whole food is going to be better for you long term than these hyper processed foods. And I think that as long as you understand there are food scientists, like their whole job is to create a bliss point, that point at which your mouth lights up, your brain lights up, all these dopamine receptors are like, eat more of this.
Yeah.
That we are really at a disadvantage.
And when I just want to clarify this, because I get this question a lot too with my clients. Whole foods, everybody, does not mean like whole foods written on a loaf of bread. Okay. Whole foods is one ingredient. It's a single ingredient. That is a food that is whole. That could be a steak. That could be a carrot. That it's something, a piece of broccoli. It is a single ingredient. That is what I think, Cynthia, you're talking about when we're talking about whole foods, not the marketing that is pushed on. Because I'm telling you right now, I think Lucky Charms has whole foods or whole grains written on the box. It's not those. It's the single ingredient whole foods that we're talking about. And just on the point of protein bars and power bars, they're literally glorified candy bars.
Yes.
That's what they are.
And that's why they taste good. Like I was saying to someone, I got stuck in an airport. I live in a part of my state where there aren't a lot of direct flights. And so more often than not, I'm taking 2 flights to get back from the West Coast or wherever I am. And I've just learned to I'll take a meat stick with me. So if I get hungry and I'm stuck in a position where there's not enough time to eat a meal, but I was just walking through, I picked up a bottle of water and I was looking at all the protein bars, just looking at the macros. And I thought to myself, this is literally, if I took a Snickers bar and I had a side-by-side comparison, that is effectively what it is. Yeah. And I think that realization helps people understand, like, this is why that protein bar tastes so good, because it's like eating a Snickers bar. Absolutely. Except it's marketed as something healthy. And that's where the deception really comes in. And that's why each one of us really has to be our own best advocate. And I always say, like, read the food labels. If you do nothing else, like if you walk away from our conversation today, read the food labels, because the more you read the food labels, you'll be surprised at the sneaky ingredient lists that are in, how they try to hide if it's high fructose corn syrup or if it's seed oils or whatever it is, these emulsifiers.
Sugars.
Yep.
The alcohol sugars that are in, it can say so many, 0 sugars or what, and then you look at the alcohol sugars and it still is affecting your body. So I think that, when you look at something, you said the comparison of a power bar and a Snickers bar, just even looking at those two things, that's not like, we have to just get in that mindset of how processed that is. A power bar is just as processed as a Snickers bar, right? It's kind of the same thing. So it's getting back to that whole food. So now let's get back to the window of eating, because I've been doing intermittent fasting, I want to say for 35 years. I'm 55 now. So I've been doing this a long time. I've had multiple arguments with my father who raised me about breakfast being the most important meal. We still argue about that today. It's kind of our thing. But that this 16-hour fast is, let's go into, because now we know this, that a lot of what the goal is a 16-hour fast with an 8-hour window of eating. And that means no calories. Having green tea with nothing in it, or coffee, water, those kind of things are good for us. But how difficult is this for most people that you find working with?
Yeah. Well, I can tell you, I think my population's probably biased because they're open and receptive. But I would say when I was still seeing patients in the clinic or in the hospital, they thought I was crazy. They were like, wait a minute, I'm going to starve. I'm like, no, actually, all of us, even you and I, have plenty of stored fuel in our bodies. We have plenty of stored fuel that we can go longer than what we think. So I think if it's a mindset shift first. And then it's the realization, like, as people get these little wins, they go from not eating any food from dinner to breakfast. It's like, oh, I can go 14 hours. I didn't even know that. And then they have so much mental clarity before they even get to the weight loss. They feel so much better. And the other thing that comes along with that is, as I'm training people with the training wheels on about intermittent fasting, it's talking about the fact that most women don't eat enough protein in their diet. So that's number one. You have to be hitting those protein macros. And ladies, this is not about vanity. This is not about having a super sculpted body. Although, I mean, I know many of us, that's what we aspire to. It's helping you understand that as we get older, we need more protein, not less. There is something called the protein leverage hypothesis. There's also the role of sarcopenia north of 40. We are losing muscle at an accelerated rate unless we are actively building it and maintaining it. Now, I'm an ectomorph, so I have to work harder than someone that's a mesomorph. And for everyone that's listening, it's like, what are you talking about? There's ectomorphs, which means I'm thin. I've always had a thin build. I'm not prone to gaining weight. There are mesomorphs who build muscle really easily. And those are most of the women that you see 40s, 50s, 60s that still have a good amount of muscle mass on. And then there's something called an endomorph. And so those are people that tend to struggle with weight gain. They probably are going to struggle a little bit more. They probably have to be more diligent about their diet. But why I'm bringing this up, one of the best ways to figure out how to go longer without eating food is to make sure you're hitting your protein macros. So no less than 30 grams per meal. And I probably get 50 or 60 minimum with each meal, because I advocate for no less than 100 grams of protein a day, along with non-starchy vegetables. So helping women understand, like, please don't go to the steakhouse and get the teeny tiny portion of chicken. You know, don't be afraid. Like last Sunday, we went out to celebrate. I had an 8-ounce steak. Granted, that was 8 ounces before it was cooked, but that was a plenty fine portion for me at the end of my feeding window. Now, 12 would have been pushing it, to be honest, but helping women understand, like, hitting those protein macros will keep you satiated. It'll keep your blood stable, your blood sugar stable. And it's going to make it much easier to go 4 to 5 hours between meals. That is the key, is to get to that point. And hitting those protein macros is number one important. I would say the other thing is, you know, especially for most of us, we really don't process effectively more than 30 grams of carbohydrates in a meal. So what does that look like? If you're eating non-starchy vegetables, big plate of greens, broccoli, cauliflower, arugula, etc., like, you can eat a good sized portion of vegetables, but if you're having, it's very hard to overeat a big sweet potato. Like I always say, when you're looking at 30 grams of a sweet potato, there's a lot of fiber. You mentioned how important fiber is. There's a lot of fiber in there that will help you make you feel full and satiated. But as we're getting older, we also become a little less insulin resistant. If someone's on hormone replacement therapy, I know this wasn't the question, right? Me too. I always say they'll have to pry my HRT out of my cold dead hands. But I think it's really, exactly. But I think it's really important for people to understand, like, if you're on HRT, you're likely going to remain more insulin sensitive than someone who is not. And thankfully, there's more and more awareness building around HRT. But what's sad is, I think the last statistic I just looked at was 4% of women are on HRT. And I was shocked. I was like, I think it's because I live in a world where all of my friends are on HRT.
Oh,
so
wait,
I think it really
4% of midlife women? That's crazy to me.
Yeah. But I think in our world, we're very aware, we're very proactive, but I think the average woman is still suffering in silence. And the average practitioner is still fearful to prescribe. patients are fearful to take. And that's why I'm glad that perimenopause and menopause are having a moment, so that women are understanding, like, you have options. You don't have to have crappy sleep. You don't have to become diabetic. You don't have to deal with feeling like anxious and depressed. I cannot tell you how many women get put on antidepressants, and what they actually need is a little bit of progesterone.
Exactly.
And, you know, I think it also just speaks to the fact that we have options. So for anyone who's watching and listening to our conversation, helping them understand that that can also play a role in, you know, how you manage and mitigate macro adjustments, how you feel, especially as you're navigating this stage in your life.
Yeah, I have a lot. There's a lot of comments. I love HRT. I love HRT.
Yep.
And I think that that was a really interesting point that you brought up about if you're on hormone replacement therapy, you are more sensitive. You're more insulin sensitive, and we want to be insulin sensitive. We want our bodies to react. Right? It's when we're insulin insensitive that we start gaining weight in midlife. So when our hormones start dropping, that's when we start becoming a little bit more insulin insensitive, and we become, you know, we start putting on that midlife weight. So how does this, and we've all been there and been, you know, made that little correction, if we're lucky, if we've got good doctors and we're advocating for ourselves. But how does this play into then the intermittent fasting, and has it shown to be super beneficial in midlife to incorporate HRT? And at what point is it dangerous? Who is this not good for? So who is it benefiting and who is it not good for?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. So I would say, based on the research that I look at, and I'm in the midst of going through getting certified by NAM, so North American Menopause Society, and I actually encourage all healthcare providers that are licensed, if you are taking care of middle-aged women, go get NAM certified. You really owe it to your patients. So I'm knee deep in this book, and they only offer exams twice a year. So I'm preparing for the June exam. So number one, based on the research, we're looking at about a 5-year window. So really looking at women in perimenopause proactively going on HRT. And it could be that maybe you're taking oral progesterone for 7 to 10 days prior to your cycle. It could also, at the tail end of perimenopause, look like maybe you're on estradiol, maybe you're on a compounded bias where you're on 2 different forms of estrogen. And then transitioning, not every woman needs testosterone, although testosterone is, again, having a moment. There is the recognition that women benefit from testosterone. I'm one of them. I was definitely one of those people. As I transitioned to menopause, my levels are like in the toilet. So my body's not making enough at this stage of life, and it really does make a difference. So your question was, when's the time to talk about it in perimenopause?
Right.
And then there's this
like every stage. That's what I think I'm getting at, because we know, you know, from a biological standpoint and from an anthropological standpoint, we're supposed to go long periods of time without food. We can't do that without water. But at what point is a fasting, like a 16-hour fast, or even a 12 to 14, 16-hour fast? At what point is that, if somebody's never tried it, is it too late to start? Is there any contraindications in terms of like people taking medications, or people that this really wouldn't work for? Because I always say, ask your doctor first before you do anything crazy, right?
Absolutely. So I would say, let's address the contraindications to fasting. So if you have an eating disordered history, so binge eating, anorexia, bulimia, unless your provider thinks you are in a position where you can actively utilize the strategy, probably not a great strategy, because it can be very triggering. And I've come to find that it's more the minority. I'm not suggesting that they can't do it at all, but it's been my experience clinically, it's generally the minority of women. Number two, if you are underweight, if you are a teenager or a young adult that's still growing, I mean, that seems like common sense, but I'll have people message me and they're like, my teenager's obese, can they fast? I'm like, no, I don't want them fasting. And then also thinking about people with chronic health conditions. If you're on a number of medications, you may need alterations in your antihypertensives, your blood pressure medication, your diabetes medication. And that's why I agree with you, like looping in your healthcare provider to determine the appropriateness of therapy. Beyond that, most people will do fine with trying a little bit of fasting. So getting back to like an opportune time. So we know, and I talk about this in my book, There's a time in a woman's menstrual cycle when they can optimize intermittent fasting. And then there's a time where we really shouldn't fast. So let's talk about when it's best to fast. We're talking about the follicular phase when estrogen predominates. Estrogen is our superpower. It's the hormone that allows us to fast a little longer, to do more intense exercise. Certainly you can get away with more carbohydrate restriction. This is typically from the day of bleed week up until ovulation. I'm oversimplifying just for clarity's perspective. After ovulation is the luteal phase, is when progesterone predominates. This is when we feel a little more mellow, we're a little bit more tired. We may want to do more yoga, restorative therapies. We probably don't want to carb restrict quite as much. That's not the time to do long fasts. I will have women that'll message me and they'll say, oh my gosh, I feel terrible. I'm trying to fast. I'm really struggling to 14 hours. I'm like, where are you in your cycle? And sure enough, it's 2 to 3 days before their cycle is supposed to start. So understanding for younger women under age 35, that's kind of the mainstay. But if you're already thin, lean, exercising a lot, I don't want you fasting all the time. There is zero desire or need to be able to do that. Maybe you're fasting once a week. Maybe you're doing a 14-hour fast. Maybe you're doing 12 hours of digestive rest. If you are obese, if you have PCOS or polycystic ovarian syndrome and you're young, you would likely benefit because of the degree of insulin resistance from a bit of fasting. But again, being mindful of where you are in your cycle. Then we look at women in perimenopause. So let's say 35 to 50. And again, an oversimplification.
But
helping women
even that age thing that you age range that you just said, 35. I think that women are not aware of how early we go into perimenopause, right? It's not
totally
it's not when you're starting to feel all the hot flashes. You're in full menopause at that point. But yeah.
I sometimes laugh. Women will like argue with me or my team. They're like, I'm 42. I'm not in perimenopause. I'm like, yeah, you are. You know, your ovaries are as old as you are. And so we should say late 30s. But I always say, like, to cover myself, 35 to 50. Average age of menopause is 51. But I agree with you. Most people have no idea. I certainly had no idea. Yeah. And to be completely fair, there's so little focus on middle-aged women and even medical training. I mean, even now it's like not even required for OBGYN residents to learn much about menopause at all. So I think that this growing awareness is certainly helpful. But looking at the perimenopausal woman, it is the same applies. You know, follicular phase, thumbs up, luteal phase, thumb down on intermittent fasting. But also we then add in the complication of we start becoming a little stress resilient. As we have less circulating progesterone, we may experience more insomnia. We may have more anxiety and depression. This is when more often than not, women are essentially prescribed sleep aids or antidepressants when what they need is a little bit more circulating progesterone. And so the stress resiliency piece becomes an issue. If you're over exercising, if you're not sleeping, macros start to really matter at this stage. This is where I really start saying to women, listen, if you do nothing else, eat more protein with your meals and eat less carbs. And that in and of itself can be life-changing. Yeah. And so that's the navigating that part. But again, it goes back to where are you in your cycle? And I think for women in menopause, provided that they're sleeping and they're managing their stress, menopause can be easy for fasting because you're not dealing with this degree of hormonal fluctuation day to day or week to week that you experienced before. So menopause in men, menopausal women and men, I think sometimes have the easiest time with fasting, but I think it always goes back to, are you sleeping? Are you managing your stress? Are you changing your diet? Because the other piece of it is a lot of women want to fast, but they don't want to change their diet. They like drinking a lot of alcohol. And the mommy drinking culture is a huge problem. I talk a lot about this. You know, and I'm like, I say it without judgment. It's just observationally, like I've lived through it. And now I proudly say, like, examine your relationship with alcohol because it can wreck your sleep, wreck your hormones. You're not going to make good food choices.
Your weight, your waistline, you know, and your skin. If you think that what you eat does not affect your skin, give up alcohol for 3 months. See what happens, right? Yeah. Your skin clears up, your waist shrinks. Like there's just this culture of acceptance of alcohol that it's not good for us. I had that awakening a couple years ago. I'm like, I'm hypocritical as a health coach to be drinking. We know it's poison. So I've really re-examined a couple years ago my relationship with alcohol. But it's interesting that could also be, you know, when you're consuming alcohol late at night, you're still you're still consuming calories. There's a lot of calories in alcohol. So it is affecting your fast in that way. It's like, it's worse than like the cream and sugar in the coffee in the morning. You're breaking your fast then. Well, you're still not fasting if you're having that glass of wine before bed. And then it's that whole roller coaster of everything that goes on with that. It's all interconnected.
And I think it's helpful for people to understand, like, our bodies prioritize alcohol as a poison. Mm-hmm. It gets prioritized before the carbs, before the protein, before the fat. And when you understand how your body processes it as a priority, because it is considered to be this toxin, it then makes sense. Okay, so if all the food I'm eating gets shuttled into fat storage, that explains why when I drink alcohol, I start having XYZ symptoms. The most important of which is that people's REM and deep sleep gets eroded. Yeah. Like, you don't get quality sleep. And if a big takeaway from our conversation is sleep has to be prioritized. It isn't sexy. It's, jokingly, someone sent me a meme the other day, like, my new bedtime is 9 p.m. I'm like, yes, that would be me. But it's okay. I'm like, when I get up in the morning, I'm refreshed. I feel good. I can tackle all the things. But I think that's a large part of that reframe mindset around middle age, is helping people understand, like, don't look at it as a negative. Look at it as all the benefits that come out of the changes that you're making and how that ultimately allows you to have a better quality of life. Yeah,
absolutely. Now, I'm not somebody that goes to bed early. I am not. I am a midnight going to bed person, okay, but I am an 8 a.m. wake up person.
Okay, and so you're getting your 8 hours.
Yeah. I'm still getting my 8 hours. I feel like at the end of the night, I kind of need that time to decompress and to, like, step away from my work life. And sometimes I need that for a couple of hours, and it kind of shifts my sleep. But for me, it works. So I'm in bed at midnight or asleep at midnight. I'm up at 8. And so my whole window of eating, my 8-hour window of eating, looks different than yours.
Yep.
Because I'm like a 9 p.m. is the last anything that goes into my mouth, really. And then it's usually like 1, sometimes 2 p.m. is my first meal. And I exercise like a beast with nothing in my stomach. With nothing in my stomach.
And I know you work hard because I've seen your videos. I think for every person that's, like, watching, there are those of us that work out fasted and feel great. And then there are people who are like, I feel like dog poop if I don't have a piece of fruit or a piece of something before I go to the gym. And so I think part of it is just figuring out, like, what makes you feel good. I have never, ever felt good having food in my stomach while I'm exercising. Not once. Like today, I broke my fast later because I slept until 7:30, which is late for me. Slept until 7:30 because we were up late last night. And then, it was like, today's a recovery day, took the dogs for a walk, got more steps in, and just ended up breaking my fast, I think at like 12:30, which is late for me. But I think that it again goes back to, figuring out what works best for you. Mm-hmm. And for me, I make sure my feeding window is wide enough so that I can get at least 100 grams of protein in. And again, most women are under eating protein. They're probably getting 40 or 50 grams a day. This may blow your minds, but really we need 30 grams minimum at a meal. That's what triggers muscle protein synthesis. This leucine threshold has to be made because we need more protein as we're aging, not less. And that is a common misconception. Like, I think about my parents who eat like birds now, they're in their 70s. And I'll say to my mom, you need to actually be eating more protein. You're becoming sarcopenic. She's thin, but she's
and for those that don't know what that means, that's
muscle wasting.
Yeah, it's muscle wasting, but even in addition to that, it's when the fat infiltrates the muscle. And when the fat gets into a muscle fiber, it's really, really difficult to lose weight after that. So your whole metabolic health is like really affected by that. Yep. So to avoid that.
Yes.
But I'm actually, this is the one thing that I think that we don't meet eye to eye on, and that's fine, is I'm on more of a lower protein diet because of the autophagy and because of the way, and this is how it works for me, but I'm more of somebody that follows Dr. Walter Longo, who is the head of the Longevity Center at USC. That's where I graduated from. So more of a lower protein diet because I want my body to reach into those fat cells for energy, but also I want the autophagy of rearranging all those damaged proteins and picking those apart and getting rid of that cellular debris. It's only in times of deprivation that actually happens, which is one of the the main things about intermittent fasting, right, is that we're wanting our bodies to then reach into those protein sources and those fat sources and utilize those and get rid of all of that bad stuff. And that's when we're talking about longevity of intermittent fasting, right? So what are like the health benefits that really help us live longer? Because we've talked about earlier that we're made to go long periods of time without food.
Yeah.
That's how our bodies are made. We're not supposed to be opening up a pantry and going, let's see what I can eat, or opening up a refrigerator and going, that food is at our beck and call. We're supposed, you know, the way our bodies are made, which haven't really changed a lot, you know, from the time we were painting on cave walls, is that we're made to go long periods of time without it. So how does this help us to live longer? And like you were talking about your parents not eating as much and being a little bit more frail, how does intermittent fasting help us live longer?
Well, a lot of it, I mean, if you look at the research, most of which is done on men and rodent models. So that's, you know, that's that thing. There has not been a lot of research done on women, with the exception of obese menopausal women. And that's a whole separate conversation. I think that when, I know, it's like, I always laugh. I'm like, women's cycles are too complicated to do, you know, research on them. And I find that, I mean, it's changing, but it's slowly kind of changing. I think it goes back to this concept of caloric restriction. Intermittent fasting is obviously more than just caloric restriction. And you're talking about autophagy, mitophagy. There's other ways to evoke autophagy, whether it's with polyphenols, whether or not it is with certain types of exercise, etc. And I think when we're talking about caloric restriction, I think for many people, it is eating less often. Yeah. It is really looking into what this represents. For me, it's a very fine, it's like a very fine line of caloric restriction to a point, and then being conscientious about what you choose to eat, how frequently you eat, etc. That's why I'm not a fan of OMAD. And I speak very openly about this because people in many ways are chronically under eating food, and certainly not for you. You're a healthy person, but I see the extremes. I see people that are completely overdoing it, over exercising, over restricting, and that in and of itself can be problematic. But it's really coming down to, when we look at the animal models, and we look at the research that's been done on men, and certainly Walter Longo, David Sinclair, these are some of the longevity experts that are probably the most popular, well-known. It's all about feeding this autophagy process on a lower carbohydrate, lower protein diet.
Yeah. So it's funny that you say that, because there are people who overdo it, and the 1 meal a day is hard for people. And I would say within any given year, there's probably 6 or 7 times that I've done like a 1 meal a day. Otherwise, I've made it a little bit simpler than that. I'm just not even doing the math. I'm just skipping breakfast.
Right.
You know, you get to that point where your body already knows what to do, right? And like I said, I've been doing this for 35 years. I've been skipping breakfast and arguing with my father about it. But I've been skipping breakfast for that long. And if you're sleeping the 8 hours and you're skipping that first meal, you're already into like at least a 14-hour fast at that point, right? So I think one of the most shocking things that I have found in working one-on-one with clients is they're shocked at how easy it really is. It's not as complicated as we think it is.
Yeah, and I think for a lot of people, it's the reframe. It's understanding that they're not going to starve, they're not going to be miserable. I think that we've just conditioned people to believe that this regular accessibility to food, and the ability to eat all day and all night if we so choose. I mean, I think the average American eats 15 to 16 times a day, given the fact they're drinking sugar sweetened beverages, they're having that fatty coffee, then they're eating throughout the day. And just over time, helping people understand, like, physiologically what's happening every time you eat. If you sit down and eat a plate of pasta with very little protein, guess what's going to happen? Very differently than what would happen if you sat down and ate a steak with some broccoli. And helping people understand that we are doing ourselves no benefits if we are eating frequently and we're eating a hyper processed diet. Sometimes it is as simple as saying to someone, I don't want you to snack anymore. Yeah. Like, we have to start with baby steps, because they don't ever eat enough with their meals, and they snack in between. And the other thing that I see a lot of women doing is what they're snacking on is hypercaloric. So they're overeating nuts, they're overeating cheese. Yes, these things are intrinsically well, maybe not the cheese, but nuts should be one ingredient, maybe that and some salt, but they're chronically over or under eating at meals, and then they're making up for the caloric intake and more in between. And so they're never actually getting to a point where their bodies can effectively utilize stored fuel as a fuel source. By that, I mean fat.
Yeah.
You and I kind of started it saying there's a lot of people who get the fat piece wrong. Like I always say, I don't eat copious amounts of fat, but I will allow my body to fast a little longer so that it can utilize some stored fat. But you're never going to see me sit down and eat 5 avocados. And I have met women who will eat they're like, if fat's good, then more fat is better. And I'm like, well, if you understand that the calories per gram actually adds up, 4 calories for carbs and for protein, and then 9 for fat, you're like, that adds up really quickly. That's why nut butters, nuts, cheese, although delicious, it's a very slippery slope.
Yeah, it is a very slippery slope. And there are those that, there are these midlife women who are hitting the gym hard, and they are intermittent fasting, and they're doing all of this stuff. And there is a way to overdo it to the point where you're not affecting your body in a positive way. And you could be potentially taking years off of your life. So how would one determine, I guess, this is a two-part question. For those of you for those subscribers who are listening right now, what would be the first step, first of all? Is that just skipping breakfast? How would you ease into that? And at what point is it too much? What are the signs that this isn't good for my body anymore? So how do you ease into it? What's the first step? And what's that other limit of you're going too far?
Yeah, I would say number one, stop snacking, because that's going to force you to restructure your meal. So that's number one. Number two is pushing that protein threshold. So in my world, 30 grams of protein per meal minimum, because that's what triggers muscle protein synthesis. That's what triggers this leucine threshold that'll help you build muscle. Number three, it's going from dinner to breakfast. And breaking your fast could be any point. Like you said, I break my fast in the afternoon. I break my fast in the morning, but I've gone from 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon until 9 or 10 o'clock in the morning. So it's really that graduated. And I find starting with 12 hours of digestive rest is reasonable.
Right.
Maybe you finish dinner at 7, you don't eat breakfast till 7 a.m. the next morning, and then slowly opening up that window.
Okay, wait. I'm going to stop you right there. So everybody, just listen to that for 1 second. A 12-hour fast, you're stopping at 7 p.m. You can have breakfast at 7 a.m. And just even that, which does not seem that difficult to do, is already doing intermittent fasting. It's at the lower end, but that's the way to start, right? Yeah. That's the way to start, just like with the 12 hours.
Yeah, and for a lot of people, I tell everyone, I have teenage boys, they're very athletic, they're very lean. They probably, even though they eat 2 dinners every night, they probably go 12 hours just on their own, depending on their physical activity. And I don't talk to them about fasting, but just watching their behaviors. They eat when they're hungry. They don't eat when they're not hungry. Now, you also asked, what are signs that you're doing too much fasting or it's not working for you? Number one is you lose your menstrual cycle. If you're still getting a cycle, and I'm not talking about this if you're 50, I'm talking about this if you're 25, 30, 35, 40, 45, you lose your menstrual cycle, because our menstrual cycle is a vital sign. It is a sign just like blood pressure and pulse and temperature. It is equally as important. Number two, your sleep goes south. If all of a sudden you cannot sleep through the night and you've just started to do fasting, that could be a sign it might be too much hormetic stress. Just like if you overexercise, you can have this result. I would say headaches. Sometimes that can also be from dehydration, but I think about, loss of muscle. Like if someone says to me, I started fasting and all of a sudden I lost all my muscle mass, and that does happen. Yeah. It has happened. I've seen women that's happened to, as well as men. That can also be problematic, but it's usually like an energy issue. It's headaches, it's fatigue, it's changes in your menstrual cycle. I would say the other thing is for some people, they're just, they binge when they sit down to eat. Like they don't like have a meal. They then, like, their brain has been hijacked by the amygdala, which is our lizard
Yeah.
brain. It overrides our prefrontal cortex. And before you know it, they've eaten 5 meals in one meal. And that's because they fasted too long. So that can also be, if you're hungry, break your fast. That's
Yeah.
usually, I'll say to people, like, please don't white knuckle fasting. That is not what fasting is supposed to be about. It is designed to be something you don't even have to think about. But if you are starving and you figure out, like, oh, I'm 3 days before my period, that's why I'm starving, then please break your fast and eat. That is so important. Hey, hey, sorry.
That's okay.
Hey, quiet.
I'm going to look through, while you're dealing with that, I'm going to look through, see if we had any. I know that there was a lot of questions that came in. A lot of, how old are you? Which is interesting. I'm 55. I love being 55. I'm not sure, Cynthia, how old you are. But there was that question that came in.
I'm 52.
52 and 55. There you go. There was a question. How do you poop? I think like every human being.
So I tell people that you should be going at least once or twice a day. If you're not, you need to figure out why, because constipation is not a normal thing. There is a reason why. Either it could be as simple as, I meet a lot of women that they're chronically stressed, and you have to be in a parasympathetic state to actually defecate. Like, let's be real. So some people need squatty potties. Some people need more hydration. There are a lot of people who are just sedentary, and that's why they don't go to the bathroom.
Oh my God. I need to do a whole live
Yes.
on pooping.
Yes.
Because
and because I'm a nurse, I mean, these are just things we talk about. It's like, to me, it's not a big deal. My teenager's rolling his eye. He just closed my door to my studies. Like, I don't want to hear you talk about this.
pooping is natural, everybody. If we're not doing it, we have some serious problems. Charming _ Desert Rose asked, typically, how many meals do you do? How many meals do you do? And then I'll go after you.
I would say 2, sometimes 3. I always make sure I have 1 day a week where I have a wider feeding window, and usually I'm consuming more protein in that wider feeding window. Occasionally carbohydrates, but I've got my carbs dialed really in. I know where my happy place is for my body, and I know that, as an example, on days I lift, I will eat more food than on days I don't lift. And that's, I'm replacing glycogen stores, and my body likes certain types of carbohydrates, but I do alternate because I think it's important not to be. I would say monogamy is good, but food monogamy, we want to make sure we're eating different things, not the same foods.
Well, yeah, because it's just, again, I'm getting back to the whole marketing of food, but like, we're used to eating in season, what's available in front of us. We're not used to having food shipped in from all different places where you can have, blueberries year round, or we can have, things year round. We're supposed to be eating in a way where we're getting a large variety of things based on what's available at that time. Somebody else asked, is it, so you say you eat 2 meals, sometimes 3. I eat 2 meals a day. My first one is normally around 1 or 2 p.m. And then the second one is about 7. And then I'll sometimes have snacks between 7 and 9. And then while I'm watching TV or doing something, and that's my day. Let's see if there was anything else that came through. There was a lot of questions, I know, but what do you eat to get 50 grams of protein per meal? That was a question. And that's for you, because that's not, I'm, like I said, I'm a little bit on a more of a lower protein. I make a ton of muscle in the gym, and restructuring the proteins that I need. So I'm on a lower protein, although I'm not against anything that you're saying with that. So how are you getting that 50 grams in one meal?
Usually 8 ounces of steak or chicken or poultry. I mean, I now know I can eyeball half a pound of shrimp, and I know that's 50 grams. Obviously, when I started being more conscientious about my protein intake, it took a little bit of time. Like, I didn't go from 30 grams in a meal to 60. But I can easily, even as a 120-pound woman, I can easily do 60 grams in a meal. But it's over time, and you can even go on Google and you can say, how much shrimp do I need to eat to hit 50 or 60 grams? I think that, just being conscientious, because if you do nothing else, like apps like Chronometer, I have no affiliation with them, but they can help you track your macros. And I think for a lot of women, they're just unaware. They have no idea. They're like, it's so hit or miss. They get the teeny tiny portion of protein, they have no idea how much they're consuming a day. So I think with knowledge builds awareness, and then you can make adjustments from there.
But also too, I think people aren't aware how much protein is actually in plants, in chickpeas and things like that. I think that a lot of us are so hyper focused on like the lean kind of animal proteins that we're really not paying attention to how much you can get, how much protein you can get in plants. Because I am predominantly plant-based. I do have small amounts of meat. I microdose my meat, which is probably why our intake of protein is a little off. It's okay. I'm going to scroll. And somebody asked how to brighten your face tone. I'm going to be talking about this tomorrow. This might be a good segue for me just to tell you what I'm going to be doing tomorrow, you guys. I had a lot of questions on brightening skin tone and on various things. Listen, it all comes down to like what we're putting in our body. That is the first thing, because skin is our largest organ. Everything that we eat shows up on our skin. Like I said earlier, you want to see how much that is correlated and related. Give up alcohol for 3 months and you will see your skin brighten. So it really is what we are eating as well. But tomorrow I'm going to be going over all of those different things, the different at-home devices that I have at home, radio frequency, microcurrent, microneedling, red light therapy, and really kind of letting people know what kind of treatment works with what kind of thing. So that's on tomorrow's show. But let's just see if there's anything else. Is there anything else you want to add? Oh, I have a big question here. Hold on one second. This is from Monica Patterson's Fitness. Oh, and it just went away. So if estrogen helps you fast longer, is it hard for postmenopausal women to fast if they aren't on hormone replacement therapy? She's 56 and postmenopausal and on HRT. So can she do a longer fast than 24 hours? Or I can do a longer fast than 24 hours than easier than before. Does that make sense?
Yeah, well, because your hormones are more stable. I mean, when you're still getting fluctuations day to day, week to week, like you do in perimenopause or even when peak cycling years, I mean, I think there was conflict. So she was on HRT or she's not on HRT?
She says she's on HRT.
Okay.
So her question is, so if estrogen helps, it just keeps moving. If estrogen helps you fast longer, is it hard for postmenopausal women to fast?
No, I think women have an easier time in menopause because they're not dealing with those fluctuations. Now, it always goes back to the basics, like, are you sleeping? Are you managing your stress? How are your macros? I mean, the other thing, and I know you talk about this a lot, strength training is king or queen in menopause. Like, if you take nothing else away, the importance of stop doing chronic cardio, stop doing, Orange Theory Fitness 5 days a week, and you wonder why you're not getting gains, or CrossFit. And I hate to pick on those two organizations because I'm sure there's a lot of merit, but I see a lot of women that are like, if I can't lose weight, I need more exercise, more fasting, more food restriction, and just helping them understand, like, the most thing you can do for metabolic health, amongst a few other things, is lifting weights and maintaining muscle. And I think that is an important message to send. Unfortunately, I still get messages, as I'm sure you do. Women will say, well, I don't want to look like a guy. I'm like, it is physiologically impossible unless you are taking exogenous steroids, which I don't think anyone in this group is. It is physiologically impossible for that to happen. You want to just have lean, healthy muscle. And you mentioned earlier that rule of sarcopenia, and to give everyone a visual, young muscle looks like filet mignon. Old muscle looks like a ribeye. Now, I like to eat steak, but I don't want to look like a ribeye. So helping people understand the infiltration of adipose tissue, inflammation. There's a lot of inflammation as we are losing muscle mass. You want to do everything you can to preserve it. So that means sleep, eating enough, don't undereat, lifting the weights. I'm one of those people, I need a little bit of TRT, a little bit of hormone replacement therapy to maintain my testosterone levels. And women, don't lose testosterone precipitously like we do estrogen. It's like estrogen, we get shoved off a cliff at the tail end of perimenopause and it drops precipitously. Testosterone can linger, and not every woman in menopause needs testosterone.
That's so funny you say that, because I often say that, like, when menopause hit me, it felt like my estrogen was fine, and then it like fell off a cliff, and all of a sudden I'm like, ugh, what is this volcano erupting inside of me? But the testosterone was much more of a gradual kind of decline. And I do find that doing like the testosterone creams really kind of helps me to help maintain that muscle mass as well. And women, I think, are a little bit confused in terms of all of the hormones that we possess. We actually possess more testosterone than we do estrogen.
Yes.
It's
And
just
that's what it's so potent. That's the one thing that, you know, there's this, just like men have estrogen in their bodies. I mean, we do have a balance of different sex hormones, but I remind people, the unfortunate thing right now is there's no FDA approved testosterone for women, which is criminal. And a lot of physicians and researchers are working on this right now. So all my stuff is compounded. You oftentimes have to ask for it. I think I saw some of the questions that came through. How do I find a practitioner that will actually prescribe hormones? You are more than welcome to message me. I can put you in touch with resources. I have no, I don't benefit from referring people. I have lots of colleagues that live all across the United States. There's a lot of telemedicine resources. There are people that will do the hormone testing and will prescribe appropriate levels of hormones.
Yeah, I think
I'm not a fan.
WellCore. I just spoke with a company the other day, or no, I actually gave away a WellCore at-home testing kit. They're now coming up with ways to test your hormones at home. And I do think what you're saying, the telemedicine is going to really take off with women's health, I think.
Yeah, I think it's important. People need access to good care. And I always say, like companies like Joy, JOI, they have telemedicine licensed providers in your state if you live in the United States. So, you know, that's always an option. I think it's just helpful for people to know, even if you're seeing I like my GYN, but she is very like hands off, like, well, if you want hormones, I'll give them to you, but I don't really love doing it. So I work with a functional medicine trained provider who prescribes all my stuff, and that has worked out really well.
And I think that is one of the problems that women think that just, you know, an OBGYN is not necessarily trained or specializes in hormone replacement therapy. You need to go to a specialist there. So, but that's like, we can be on a whole different subject with that.
We'll have to do that another day. But yeah, I think that there's a lot of misconception, misinformation. Like, I certainly have benefited from hormone replacement therapy. I don't look at it the same way if I were on blood pressure medicine, and there's no judgment. I mean, some people are on blood pressure medicine, but hormone replacement therapy has allowed me to continue to feel, I mean, I feel even better at 52 than I probably did at 32. At 32, I think about what my lifestyle was like. I had a very stressful job. My husband traveled a lot. But that's what you just kind of suck it up. But now it's like I sleep really well. I manage my stress. And like I said earlier, I think a lot of middle age is prioritizing yourself, not in a selfish way, but in a way that allows your body to be optimized.
Yeah. I 100% agree. We spend, you know, most of our lives taking care of others and raising kids, and all of a sudden our hormones start changing, and we start feeling not our optimal. And it's important for that self-love, right? And we'll get into, so we have a lot of questions coming in about the hormones and all of that. I would love to have you back on, because we're kind of at the end of this, at the hour. I would love to have you back on. But give us just a little tiny takeaway about the intermittent fasting. If there's any other information you want to add, and then where can everybody find you, and then we'll close it out.
Yeah, so intermittent fasting is a strategy that works well for a lot of people, and I'm very transparent when I say that it works well for most, but not all. And so that's okay. You might just do a 12-hour digestive rest, and that might be what you do. I have a whole book talking about intermittent fasting in women. I have a podcast dedicated to women in perimenopause and menopause called the Everyday Wellness Project. Then I've got tons and tons of resources across social media. YouTube is growing. Instagram is steadily growing. But reach out to me if you watch this episode. Please let me know, and let me know how I can help serve you. If you have questions, we have lots of resources. We'd love to point you in that direction.
Cynthia, would I be able to add you on as a collaborator so that you can answer some of those questions kind of when that gets posted? Because I think that there's so much great information here. I am going to post this to my main feed. I'll invite you on as a collaborator. I would love to have you on for a whole other show. You are a wealth of knowledge, and I love that. I see you. I appreciate you.
Likewise.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay.
Have a good day.
Have a good rest of your day, everybody.
Bye.
Okay. Bye.